I know you're not coming back anymore. So why do I keep on watching?
I want to be ninja. I want to be ninja. I want to chop, 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 chop down.
We are talking House of Ninjas. This is an 8-episode series for Netflix, created by Dave Boyle. That might not sound like a typical Japanese name, because it isn't. Dave Boyle is actually an American, but tends to specialise in making Asian kind of infused TV shows and movies. So House of the Ninja, broadly based on an early 80s ninja series. And this is going to be a spoiler-free kind of review here, but I'll give you the broad strokes of the plot. Effectively, it focuses on a family of ninjas who are living in Japan and are sort of serving a kind of Men in Black style kind of government agency that kind of sends them on missions. Now, in this kind of family of ninjas, you ultimately have 3 generations. You've got a grandma, you've got a mum and dad, and you've got 3 children, kind of a son, a daughter, and a young child. And there was a 4th child, the eldest son, who was apparently killed on an earlier mission. And they're effectively sent on various kind of missions with the kind of the promise of defending Japan. However, there seems to be a kind of rival Shinobi clan, one which they've had some history with, and they seem to be having a dastardly plan that effectively involves kind of a chemical weapon and a possible coup against the government, and maybe even some supernatural stuff in there. So that's the broad strokes of the kind of the plot here. The series kind of oscillates between a family drama, effectively having the relationships between a kind of family who happen to be ninjas and the actual kind of like the missions as well. So let's discuss what works in this show. So it's quite a fun premise, having this kind of family, ultimately this clan who is literally a family, and seeing how their downtime is spent. Part of the fun of this movie is it has or series I should say, is that it has a slightly kind of comedic edge, and each of the family members are kind of dealing with various different things in their lives. Ultimately, the whole family is dealing with the loss of the eldest son, and a lot of the themes of this kind of series is family tragedy. But within that, you have the kind of the father who kind of wants to kind of really quit the ninja business, the mother who is bored with the kind of the humdrum life, so to speak, and secretly kind of goes on missions without her husband knowing. You've got the kind of the remaining son, or the remaining adult son, I should say, feels guilty about what happened to his older brother, and ends up having a kind of a romance with this kind of reporter, which is kind of forbidden. And then you've got the younger daughter who kind of idolises the elder brother, and you've got like a young kid who's there for kind of comedy relief, who doesn't really know what's going on, and also a grandma. So they all have these little kind of individual kind of personal kind of stories, which are kind of quite fun, I have to say. The first half of the series focuses more on that, with the second half more on the actual kind of plot in regards to the rival kind of ninja clan and things like this. The series has a slick production, takes place and filmed in Japan apparently. Dave Boyle being an American director, it does have a kind of Western feel to it. And I think some of the kind of like the sort of tendencies of some of Japanese directed and kind of showrunners and things like that tend to be a little more out there. This one has a little bit more of a kind of a Western kind of style plot, I would say, with kind of betrayals, family drama, and all this kind of stuff, relationship issues. So it feels like it is coming more from the West, even though obviously the cast and crew here are primarily kind of Japanese. Well, we do have our fight scenes. I think they're well choreographed and exciting. and we have some kind of cool kind of costumes and things like that. And there's a good use of kind of the ninja mythology and, you know, what it kind of means to be a shinobi, as they prefer to be called in this series, and things like that. I think the acting is pretty strong. I watched the Japanese language version, although I think you can watch it dubbed. But I thought the acting was all pretty good, and I kind of quite liked some of our characters here. For me, the mum was probably the favourite sort of character, because she has this kind of like kind of cheeky energy to her, I suppose, where she relishes the kind of the danger in her life, so to speak, and it has some quite kind of comedic moments and stuff. We've got a kind of sullen kind of remaining kind of adult male who is the kind of, I guess, the main character, and he's kind of like this kind of somewhat of an emo, I guess, but he's, you know, he makes for a kind of a tragic kind of hero to a certain degree. And I like the fact with him, for example, he's painted as to be, he doesn't like killing, he's a shinobi or a ninja that has this kind of like, he doesn't actually want to kill anyone, he just wants to kind of incapacitate people, which leads ultimately to some problems within this kind of series, you might say. But he doesn't have that sort of killer instinct. So there's various kind of dramas and stuff, which, you know, I quite like the fleshing out of on humanising these kind of characters, so they're not just kind of faceless ninja assassins, which ultimately I think, you know, a lot of media kind of portrays ninjas as this, to be honest with you. It's showing you the kind of the people behind this to a certain degree, which gives it this kind of like fun and somewhat of a unique take on the ninja subgenre, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, there's some great kind of set design. It's kind of somewhat fantastical, and there are elements here of kind of like big tech and some following the kind of trends and things like that kind of resonate with, I think, kind of audiences today. The plot is easy enough to follow. It is somewhat predictable, I have to be honest, but you know, it's not one that I think is necessarily too hard to follow, and it does try to have some moral ambiguity in it towards the end of the series, or I don't think it fully succeeds in that, but nonetheless, at least there's an attempt, I suppose. Let's talk about what doesn't work in this series. So I think some of our characters some were more fleshed out than others. I really didn't feel like we got to know the father all that well, or the grandmother. Those two characters seem to be less characters and more props, is the best way I would describe it. We do get to see a reasonable amount of the father, but he doesn't tend to have much in the way of his personal stuff going on. We see him at work a few times, but I never really felt like I got to know the character. And then the grandma just seems to appear and disappear when the plot kind of suits her, or, you know, and it's just, I don't know, for some reason it just seems like she's not always around for some reason, for whatever reason, you know. So those two characters are, you know, a little bit underdeveloped, to be honest. Now you might think, well, you know, maybe that we didn't have time, which leads me on to the next thing. I have to say, I wouldn't say this is slow paced. I have seen some critiques that say this series is too slow paced. I wouldn't say that, but it does drag at times. Netflix had this kind of reputation for stretching out kind of their series where it felt kind of unnatural. And although I wouldn't say I necessarily felt this was too stretched out that much, or it was necessarily slow paced, but there are elements here that drag. We spend the last few episodes following our mother and father on a kind of a mission that just seems to drag on, that ultimately I didn't think really went anywhere. Just for one example, but there are some elements here that I just didn't feel like got enough kind of traction and kind of affected the pacing a little bit. The plot, I have to say, is quite pedestrian when it's all said and done. There are a few kind of like intricacies what I thought were interesting, but there are some, the broad strokes of the plot you can kind of see coming a mile away. And there are some kind of, there's some comedic moments, some of which I enjoyed, but there are a little moments here and there that I think err on the side of being somewhat kind of broad. We especially have a couple of like comedic characters that are very bordering on silly at times. Going back to the plot, without kind of saying anything specific, I felt there were some plot holes or some things that weren't particularly kind of fully addressed. I won't go into a lot here because I don't want to spoil it, but one I'll say, we learned that the eldest brother was seemingly killed on a mission 6 years ago before this kind of, this story takes place. But we have this reporter, but apparently the body was never found. But this reporter has some information about this brother, or knows who he is. But without the body, how does she know? For example, and things like that. So there are a few kind of like plot holes and things that to me that weren't properly kind of like introduced or kind of just skimmed over. Our bad guys plot, I think they save a little bit too much towards the end of the series, the last like 2 episodes, to really layer that in, and I felt like it could have introduced a little earlier, because I felt again it just seemed a little bit rushed about the kind of the motivations about what our sort of quote unquote bad guys are up to. There's some character turns here which I don't know if I fully bought. Some kind of like what characters end up doing. That spoil anything here. Again, I was thinking I'm not sure I completely buy that. There is some odd choices in music that I don't think quite fit this show. And then the other thing is, the last thing I would say really is, this being a show about ninjas, you would expect this to be relatively violent. And although there are a reasonable amount of fight scenes, it is not as action heavy as you think it is going to be. And the action that you do get is relatively bloodless. There is a little bit of blood, but considering the amount of people that end up getting killed in this show, it's not that much. And I suppose actually, there's one other thing. To me, again, some of the kind of the writing here, like we have this family of ninjas, and they are against another clan of ninjas, which seem to have literally hundreds of ninjas. But they go through these guys like a knife through butter. And it's like, how is the skill level so different between these two clans of ninjas? I mean, we've got really a family of 4 versus like hundreds of other ninjas from a rival clan. So you would imagine their skills would be somewhat on par, but I mean, they just go through them like nothing. Again, it's that stormtrooper kind of style of bad guys, where you've just got faceless minions that are just chopped up, and I didn't really feel like there was that much of a kind of a threat. They're just kind of foot soldiers to be kind of sliced up, and I just thought, who are all these kind of like ninjas that just seem to be kind of useless, to be honest. So I think this series is quite fun, and it's an enjoyable watch, and it's has some good moments in it, some good characters in there, and it looks great. But the story to me was a little lacking, and there's some elements within that story that could have been better. I would say it's probably worth a watch if you like the kind of the martial arts sort of style of kind of series or cinema and things like that. But I feel like it's not got all its ducks in a row, if you ask me. So it's a 6 out of 10. It's an above average kind of TV show, I would say, but it doesn't seem like it's been quite finessed as much for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.